At 6:12 a.m., on a freezing November morning, just 3 days before Thanksgiving, a homeless man stopped me outside a diner and asked a question that didn't just catch me off guard, it split something open inside me. I was standing there rubbing warmth back into my hands, waiting for the neon "open" sign to flicker on, when he approached. Thin jacket, cracked lips, eyes too tired for a man who couldn't have been much older than 40. I assumed he wanted money. Most people in my position would. I braced myself for it. But he didn't ask for spare change. He didn't ask for food. He didn't even ask for help. He looked at me, really looked, and said, "Sir, do you ever feel guilty for surviving?" In that instant, the cold wasn't just around me. It pressed into my chest, heavy and sharp. I felt every mistake I'd buried, every memory I'd avoided, every unspoken regret I'd carried for decades. There are questions you can ignore, and there are questions that demand you answer, even if the answer ruins the life you've been pretending to live. That one. It drilled through 66 years of silence and struck something I'd never dared touch, the truth about myself. Before I tell you what he said next, before I tell you why those words changed the course of my life in a single morning, make sure you subscribe, so you don't miss stories like this. I promise, what happened between that man and me on that cold November sidewalk? I've never told anyone until now. Because what he revealed afterward wasn't just a story. It was a confession, one that forced me to face my own. The truth is, that morning wasn't supposed to be memorable at all. I'd stepped out of my house before sunrise because I couldn't sleep again. That happens more often now. 66 years old, and my nights are filled with ghosts that refuse to stay in the dark, faces I haven't seen in years, choices I never fixed, and a kind of silence that settles deeper than any cold wind. Thanksgiving was coming, and instead of looking forward to warmth and family, I felt a heaviness I couldn't shake. Most people my age talk about grandkids visiting, long tables set with too much food, laughter spilling through hallways. My house doesn't sound like that anymore. It hasn't in a long time. I woke up at 4:50 that morning, stared at the ceiling, and realized something I'm ashamed to admit. I didn't know who I'd become without anyone around to tell me. That's why I left the house before dawn. I wasn't heading anywhere in particular, just walking so the walls wouldn't breathe down my neck. My knees ached with every step, a reminder that time collects its debts whether you're ready or not. The cold air felt sharp, but at least it felt like something. Some mornings I feel nothing. When I reached the diner, the parking lot was empty, slick with frost. My reflection in the window looked older than I expected. Not just in years. Older in spirit, the way people look when they've gone too long without saying what needed to be said. I rubbed my hands together, waiting for the sign to flicker on, trying to push away the same thoughts that always returned this time of year. Thanksgiving used to be my favorite holiday. Not because of food, not even because of family gatherings, no, it was something quieter. It was the one day I felt like I could pretend everything was okay. One day when smiles felt real, even if they weren't. But pretending catches up with you. And that morning, as I watched my breath drift into the cold air, I felt it, the unmistakable weight of a man who has run out of things to blame and finally has to face himself. I didn't expect anyone to interrupt that moment. I certainly didn't expect a stranger to peel back a part of me I'd kept locked away. When I saw the homeless man approaching from across the street, I almost stepped aside. I was lost in my own misery and didn't have patience left for anyone else's. But fate, if you believe in such things, doesn't ask for your permission. He walked straight toward me, shivering, hands buried in his sleeves, eyes fixed with a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. A man at the bottom of life, carrying something heavier than the world had the right to put on him. I didn't know it then, but that morning wasn't about my loneliness. It was about someone who had lost far more, and still had something left to teach me. That's where everything truly began. He stopped a few feet in front of me, breathing hard, as if the cold had settled deep inside his lungs. For a second, neither of us spoke. I just watched him pull his sleeves over his knuckles, trying to hide the way his fingers shook. I've seen men down on their luck before, but there was something different about him. Not just poverty. Something tighter, something burning low like the last ember in a dying fire. "Sir," he said quietly, "sorry to bother you." I stiffened. That's what guilt does, it makes you defensive before anyone has even asked for anything. I nodded once, enough to acknowledge him without inviting more. But he didn't look away. His eyes locked on mine with a kind of searching desperation, as if he was deciding whether I was someone safe to speak to or just another cold wall life kept slamming him against. "You look like a man who's lost more than he ever admitted," he said. That sentence froze me more than the weather. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. People don't usually see through you like that, not strangers, and especially not ones fighting their own battles just to survive the morning. I swallowed and forced out, "Do we know each other?" He shook his head. "No. But pain has a certain shape. You can recognize it even in the dark." I should have walked inside the diner right then. Should have brushed him off, ignored him, pretended he was talking nonsense. But something in me cracked. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the way he said it, not with pity, not with judgment, but with the certainty of someone who had bled the same way. "What do you want?" I asked, softer this time. He pulled in a slow breath, steadying himself. "Just a place to sit for a minute. I don't need money. I'm not asking for food. I haven't spoken to anyone in days." That admission hit harder than any request for help. There was a vulnerability in his voice that stripped away the assumptions I'd formed in the first 30 seconds of meeting him. Loneliness recognizes loneliness. And his was louder than mine. I stepped aside and gestured to the bench next to the diner window. "It's warmer under the heater lamp." It was the only kindness I could think of, and even that felt small. He sat down with a quiet groan, like his bones hurt in ways that had nothing to do with age. I sat a few feet away from him, my body rigid, unsure why I stayed but unable to leave. A passing car splashed through a puddle, and for a moment we just listened to the sound of tires and cold wind. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." "Same." I glanced at him. His eyes were red, not from drugs, not from alcohol, but from someone who'd been awake far too long with thoughts that wouldn't let go. He rubbed his face with both hands, then let them fall into his lap. "It's funny," he murmured. "People think the worst part about being homeless is hunger, or the weather, or the danger. But it's the silence. The way the world stops seeing you. The way your name fades, even in your own head." A tightness formed in my chest. I looked down at my hands, wondering how a man society overlooked could speak more honestly to me than anyone in my life had in years. I didn't know his past, not yet. Didn't know the storm that had buried him. But in that moment, I understood something clearly. This wasn't a man looking for pity. This was a man drowning quietly. And somehow, he had noticed I was drowning too. That was the moment I knew I couldn't just walk away. And as strange as it sounds, that was the moment my life began to change. We sat there on the narrow bench beneath the diner's weak heater lamp, the orange glow flickering like it was struggling to decide whether to stay alive or give up. The cold clung to everything, the air, the concrete, even the silence between us. Yet somehow, sitting next to him didn't feel awkward. It felt inevitable. Steam from the diner's kitchen vent drifted above us, carrying the smell of bacon and burnt coffee. I've never been a religious man, but something about that moment felt designed. Two strangers, both up before dawn, both weighed down by different versions of the same emptiness. He rubbed his hands together, trying to coax warmth back into them. His knuckles were swollen, skin cracked, nails dirty but not neglected, more the kind of wear you get from hard work gone on too long without rest. There was a dignity in the way he held himself, even with no coat thick enough to fight the cold. He sat upright, shoulders squared, like someone who once stood tall before life taught him how quickly the ground can disappear beneath your feet. "You sure you don't want a coffee?" I asked. It felt strange, offering something simple to someone whose problems clearly ran deeper than hunger. He shook his head slowly. "I don't take anything unless I earn it," he said. "Bad habit of mine." It wasn't said proudly. It wasn't said with shame either. Just fact, an anchor he clung to so the world wouldn't wash him away completely. A gust of wind hit us, sharp enough to make my eyes sting. He squinted into it like he was used to bracing against far worse. When the gust passed, he lowered his hands and stared at the steam rising from a nearby grate. "You mind if I talk for a minute?" he asked quietly. Not the kind of talking that asks for anything. Just, talking. I nodded, and for some reason, my chest tightened. Maybe it was the way he said it, like words were a weight he'd been carrying too long and finally needed to set down before they crushed him. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. His voice dropped, steadier now, almost resigned. "Before everything fell apart, before all this," he gestured faintly at his worn clothes, "the street corner, the dawn, I used to have a life that didn't look anything like this." He paused, eyes fixed on the pavement. "And what I lost? I didn't lose it the way people think." I leaned forward without realizing it. Something in his tone, something buried, told me the story he was about to share wasn't just tragedy. It was confession. And somehow, I already sensed it would mirror my own in ways I didn't want to face. He didn't start with the tragic part of his story. People rarely do. Wounds don't open themselves immediately, they peel back slowly, one memory at a time. He kept his eyes on the steam rising from the grate as he spoke, voice steady, almost distant, like he was watching his own past from far away. "You know," he began, "people look at me now and think this is all I've ever been. A man on a bench asking for nothing. But once my life looked a lot like the lives of the people walking past me every day." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his sleeve, almost absent-mindedly. "I grew up in a small town outside El Paso. Nothing fancy. Just one grocery store, 2 churches, and a main road so quiet you could hear a pickup coming a mile away. My mother used to say that peace is the most dangerous thing in the world, because it tricks you into thinking life will always stay gentle." He paused, giving that thought room to breathe. I didn't believe her back then. Life was simple. I was the kind of kid who woke before sunrise because I loved the feel of cold grass on my feet. My dad was a mechanic, hard-working, always covered in grease, hands scarred from tools slipping. But he loved what he did. Loved fixing things. Said the world made more sense when you worked on something that could be repaired. His lips twitched into a faint smile, the first sign of warmth I'd seen from him. I learned everything from him. Engines, wiring, old radios, anything broken, we tried to bring it back to life. Funny thing is, when you spend your childhood fixing machines, you start to believe people work the same way. That if someone breaks, you can just tighten a bolt, replace a part, and they'll run again. He exhaled slowly, breath clouding in the cold air. When I turned 18, I left home to become an electrician. Got my certification, started working under a big contracting company. Long hours. Hard work. But I loved it. There's pride in lighting up a room for the first time. Pride in building something people depend on. And I was good at it. Damn good. He shifted slightly, stretching his stiff fingers. I met my wife on a job site. Her uncle owned the property we were renovating. She was there dropping off paperwork for him, walking across the gravel in sneakers too white for construction work. She smiled at me like she already knew I'd stare too long. He chuckled softly, a sound that carried weight and sorrow layered together. Her name was Marissa. A nurse. The kind of woman who made the world feel safer just by standing next to you. I married her at 25. Best decision I ever made. We got a little place together, nothing big, but it was ours. 2 small bedrooms, creaky floors, a yard full of stubborn weeds. We filled it with mismatched furniture and too many blankets. His expression softened, almost glowing with memory. We had a daughter a year later. Sophia. Big brown eyes, always curious, always tugging at my shirt asking how things worked. I taught her everything I knew. How to hold a wrench. How to follow a wire. How to take things apart without losing the screws. She reminded me of myself, except she was better at everything. I watched him closely. His voice had shifted, lighter, fuller. Grief hadn't entered yet, but it hovered at the edges like a shadow waiting its turn. For a while, life was beautiful. Not perfect, but beautiful. We had dinners together every night. Sunday mornings were for pancakes. Thanksgiving was always at my sister's house, loud, chaotic, full of kids and too much food. His breathing tightened for a moment. It felt like the kind of life you don't realize is rare until you lose it. He swallowed, the movement stiff, deliberate. I wasn't a rich man, but I was a present one. I worked hard, paid my bills, saved where I could. I thought if I did everything right, nothing bad would come. I thought effort protected you. That responsibility guaranteed safety. His head lowered slightly. That's the dangerous thing about stability, it convinces you that tragedy only visits other people. And when it comes for you, it doesn't knock. It breaks the door down. He fell silent after that, breathing deeply, preparing for the part of his story he didn't want to tell. And I felt it, the shift in the air, the moment when a life that once stood tall begins to lean toward the fall that changes everything. He drew in a shaky breath, the kind a man takes when he's standing at the edge of a memory he'd rather never touch again. His hands tightened together, knuckles whitening beneath dirt and cold. The fall doesn't start big, he said quietly. People imagine it's one devastating moment that knocks you flat. But it starts with small things. Subtle cracks you don't see until everything collapses. He stared straight ahead, eyes unfocused. It began with the overtime. I was pushing 60-hour weeks to save for Sophia's school expenses. She wanted to be an engineer, said she wanted to build things the world could depend on. I worked like a madman to make sure money never stopped her. A faint smile crossed his face, pride mixed with pain. One night, after a long shift, I missed a step on a scaffold. Dropped 12 feet. Landed on my back hard enough to knock the wind out of me. I heard the crack before I felt the pain. His fingers moved instinctively to his lower spine. The doctors said it was a minor fracture. Said I'd recover. Said I just needed rest. But rest is a luxury when bills don't stop coming. I tried to keep working. Every movement felt like a blade twisting in my spine. He lowered his gaze. That was the beginning. A truck passed on the distant road, its lights flickering briefly across his face, enough to show the exhaustion etched into every line. I started taking medication to keep going. At first just enough to dull the pain. Then enough to ignore it. Then enough to outrun everything else. Marissa noticed. She always noticed. She begged me to slow down, to stop working, to get treatment. He swallowed hard. I didn't listen. Pride's a stupid thing. I told myself I could handle it. Told her I'd be fine. Told myself real men don't break. His voice cracked. But real men do break. They just pretend not to. He dragged a hand across his face, the cold emphasizing the tremor in his fingers. The medication turned into dependency. Dependency turned into panic when my prescription ran out. I was falling behind at work, missing deadlines, making mistakes. They let me go one morning without warning. A man with a bad back and a bad habit is a liability. He looked away, jaw tightening as if reliving the moment. I walked home that day rehearsing how I'd tell Marissa. I never got the chance. When I opened the door, she was sitting at the table holding a letter. His voice dropped. Sophia had been in a car accident on her way back from school. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The silence between us filled with the weight of it. She died before I got to the hospital, he finally whispered. One moment she was dreaming about the future, the next, I was choosing a coffin instead of buying her textbooks. He pressed both hands against his eyes, trying to hide the tears that had already begun to escape. I didn't handle it well. No father does. But the way I responded, that was on me. I stayed quiet. Listening. Holding his words carefully. Marissa tried to grieve with me, but I shut down. Fell deeper into the pills. Started drinking with them. Anything to numb it. Anything to stop remembering the sound of her laugh. Or the way she'd fall asleep on the couch after school. Or the smell of her hair when she hugged me goodnight. His breathing grew uneven. He forced it steady. Marissa stayed as long as she could. Longer than I deserved. But grief breaks people in different ways. She needed connection. I wanted isolation. She begged me to get help. I pushed her away. She cried. I yelled. I said things that should never leave a man's mouth. He clenched his fists. One morning, she packed a small bag and said she was going to stay with her sister for a week. She said we both needed space. She left a note, asking me to choose between my addictions and the family I had left. He paused, trembling. I didn't choose her. I didn't choose anything. I drowned. And when she came back 2 weeks later, she found the shell of a man who couldn't look at her without seeing the daughter he'd failed. He exhaled a bitter laugh. She filed for separation. Told me she loved me but couldn't watch me destroy myself. I signed the papers numb. I don't think I felt anything for months. A cold wind swept across us, rattling the diner's metal door. He didn't flinch. After that, everything unraveled. Bills piled up. I sold what little we had left. I burned through savings. Lost the house. Lost the car. Lost every chance I had to fix things. He looked up at me then, eyes hollow, raw, stripped of any pride. You want to know the worst part? He asked. I nodded, unable to speak. I didn't lose everything because tragedy hit me. I lost everything because I didn't know how to ask for help when it mattered. He let the words settle, heavy and unfiltered. And when you run from the pain too long, eventually there's nowhere left to run except the streets. He fell silent again, breath trembling, the past sitting between us like a ghost neither of us dared to touch. That was the moment I began to understand. His fall wasn't a single moment. It was a lifetime collapsing one crack at a time. For a long moment, we both just sat there, two men shivering in the cold, connected by losses neither of us had planned for. I watched his breath rise in uneven clouds, watched the way he held himself together by threads thin enough to snap at any second. I thought that was the end of his story. It wasn't. He turned his head slightly, eyes settling on me with an intensity that made something inside me brace. You know, he said slowly, I didn't approach you this morning because I needed company. Or warmth. Or someone to listen. His voice dropped, softer but sharper. I approached you because, you reminded me of someone. I stiffened. Someone you knew. He nodded. Someone I wronged. I tried to find a response, but he kept going before I could speak. When you first looked at me, the way your shoulders tensed, that look wasn't judgment. It was guilt. Real guilt. I've seen it before. I know exactly what it looks like. He shifted his weight, pulling his sleeves tighter around his hands. My father had that same look the last time I saw him. A jolt ran through me. Your father. He nodded again. He was the kind of man who held pain like a secret. A quiet man. Stubborn. Proud. The kind who carried everyone else's weight until his knees finally buckled under it. I felt something twist in my stomach. That description wasn't vague, it was painfully familiar. He continued, voice steady but loaded. I shut him out after Sophia died. He tried to help, tried to talk to me, tried to pull me out before I drowned. He called, he visited, he begged me to get clean, and in return I blamed him. Told him he didn't understand. Told him to leave me alone. Told him he couldn't fix me, so why bother trying? He closed his eyes, jaw tightening. He died a year later. Heart attack. Alone. The air between us felt suddenly colder, sharper than the morning wind. I never apologized. I never went back. I never gave him a chance to forgive me. And when I saw you, standing there with your hands shaking, your eyes tired, the kind of man who's lost too much but still wakes up before dawn. His voice cracked just enough to show the fracture beneath. I thought for a moment, I thought maybe life was giving me a chance to say something to someone who reminded me of him. A chance I never had with the man who raised me. I swallowed hard, throat tightening. My heart began thudding in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. You said I reminded you of him, I whispered. I did, he replied. But it was more than that. There's a heaviness on you I recognized immediately. The kind a man carries when he's lost people he never made things right with. The kind that eats you alive in silence. I stared at my hands. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't even close to wrong. He leaned forward slightly, studying my expression. I don't know your story, he said gently. But I know the look of a man who's running out of time to heal what's broken. Then he added, almost inaudibly. And I think that's why I was meant to talk to you today. For a few seconds, the world around us faded, the empty parking lot, the cold wind, the flickering heater lamp. All I could feel was the weight of his words pressing directly against a part of me I'd kept barricaded for years. I had come there to escape my own regrets. Instead, a stranger had reached in and set them on the table between us. He wasn't just telling me about his life. He was revealing something about mine. His words didn't just land, they hit the exact place I'd been avoiding for years. I sat there frozen, my hands gripping the edge of the bench as if letting go would make every memory I'd buried surge back all at once. He wasn't guessing. Somehow, he had read me with unsettling precision. I don't know what you think you see in me, I murmured, but whatever guilt you're talking about, it's not something I share with strangers. He nodded as if he expected that response. Most men don't. Most men don't share it with themselves either. I looked away, staring at the frost on the pavement. For decades I've been able to dodge conversations like this, polite small talk, surface-level smiles, enough distance to keep the truth safely contained. Yet this stranger, broken in ways I couldn't begin to measure, had cracked through the armor without effort. And maybe I'd been waiting for someone to. For years, I said slowly, I've been living in a house that used to be filled with noise, laughter, arguments, footsteps running down the hall. Now it's quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that forces memories into corners you thought you sealed shut. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, truly listened, in a way I hadn't experienced in so long I couldn't remember the last time. My son and I paused, the words sticking. We had a falling out. A bad one. I said things out of anger, he said things out of pride, and neither of us backed down. Years passed. Pride got heavier. Apologies got harder. Then one day he stopped calling altogether. I swallowed, a sharp ache forming behind my ribs. I told myself he'd come around. Told myself he needed space. But Thanksgiving comes every year, and the seat across from me stays empty. A slow breath left me, unsteady. And the worst part? I didn't fix it. I didn't reach out. I let time pull us further apart like an old rope fraying strand by strand. I kept expecting him to be the one to break the silence. But now I realize, he probably thought I was waiting on him. The man nodded softly. Silence is a dangerous thing between people. It grows teeth. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I saw more than his hardship. I saw the reflection of my own failures in the lines of his face. I've lived a long life, I said, voice low, long enough to know regret doesn't fade with age. It calcifies. Becomes part of your bones. Every year I wait, it gets heavier. And I'm scared one day I'll wake up and find out I waited too long. My throat tightened as the words poured out, unfiltered. I didn't expect to tell you any of this, I admitted. Hell, I didn't expect to tell anyone. But when you said I looked like a man running out of time to fix what's broken, you weren't wrong. You weren't wrong at all. The homeless man leaned back, studying me with a weary understanding. That's why I told you my story, he said quietly. Not for pity. Not for help. But because the hardest part of climbing out of a hole is admitting you're in one. The cold wind drifted between us, carrying the weight of everything left unspoken. And for the first time that morning, I didn't feel like I was sitting with a stranger. I felt like I was sitting with the one person who could finally see me. He shifted on the bench, as if preparing himself to say something heavier than everything he'd already shared. The steam from the diner vent drifted above us, and for the first time that morning, he looked almost afraid, like the next part of his story wasn't meant to wound him, but me. Can I tell you one last thing? He asked. I nodded. He lowered his gaze to his trembling hands, rubbing the joints slowly as if warming them might steady whatever truth he was about to release. You talked about your son, he said. About how silence built a wall between you two. I felt my throat tighten. Well, he continued, let me tell you something I never told anyone, not even Marissa before she left. The wind shifted, cold and sharp. My father, he didn't die alone the way I told you earlier. He paused. I wasn't there when he passed, yes, but he called me the night before. I ignored it. My heart dropped. He took a slow breath. He left a voicemail. Just 23 seconds long. I listened to it months later, after the funeral. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. His voice quivered, the memory doing the breaking for him. He said, son, I love you. I know you're hurting. I'm not calling to lecture you. I'm calling to tell you that you still have a life worth living. And there's still time to turn it around. He paused, tears collecting but refusing to fall. That message, those words, they were the last things he ever said to me. My chest tightened painfully. And I didn't respond, he whispered. Didn't call back. Didn't show up. I let pride win. I let grief win. And now I have to carry that for the rest of my life. The silence between us grew heavier. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked me dead in the eyes. Don't do what I did, he said. Don't wait for a funeral to remember you still had something worth saving. Don't wait until the person you love is cold in the ground before you realize silence is just another form of running away. A breath escaped him, shaky and raw. You think you're protecting yourself by staying quiet, but you're not. You're building a prison. And every year you wait, the bars get thicker. I stared down at my hands, hearing his father's final words repeating in my mind, not for him, but for me. He leaned closer, voice low but unwavering. You still have time, he said. You're still here. And the person you lost isn't gone, he's just waiting for the version of you that stopped showing up. I didn't speak. I couldn't. He sat back, breathing out slowly. That's all I wanted to tell you, he murmured. Not to fix me. Not to feel sorry for me. But so you don't end up with the same regret I wake up with every morning. His voice softened to almost a whisper. Whatever you do, don't wait until it's too late. When he finished speaking, the air around us felt pierced open. The heater lamp above the bench flickered once, then steadied, casting a weak glow over two men who suddenly seemed far older than the hour suggested. I wanted to say something, anything. But the weight of his words pinned me in place. Before I could gather enough breath to respond, he stood. Slowly, carefully, like a man carrying more years than his body could contain. He nodded once, not as a goodbye, but as if to say, "That's enough for today." Then he stepped off the curb and walked down the empty street, his figure shrinking into the dawn. I didn't call after him. I should have. But I didn't. For several minutes I stayed seated, replaying every part of his story, the fracture, the pills, the daughter, the father, the voicemail, the regret. My own memories tangled with his until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. When I finally rose to my feet, the diner's neon sign had just flickered to life. But I wasn't hungry anymore. I wasn't cold either. Something else had taken hold of me, a restless urgency, the feeling you get when you suddenly realize you've missed something important. I walked in the direction he'd gone, scanning every corner, every alley, every doorway. Nothing. The early morning streets were nearly empty, and I couldn't find a single trace of him. Not footprints in the frost. Not a shadow moving between the buildings. Not even a silhouette at the bus stop. It was as if he'd vanished into the city the same way he'd survived in it, quietly, invisibly. I asked the man sweeping the sidewalk outside the laundromat if he'd seen someone pass through. He shook his head. I asked the delivery driver unloading crates behind the bakery. Nothing. I crossed the street twice, peered through fogged-up windows, circled the block. Still nothing. I returned to the bench where we had talked. The seat was still slightly warm, the only proof he'd ever been there. On the ground beside it, something caught my eye, a slip of cardboard, worn at the edges, half hidden by frost. I picked it up. It wasn't a note. It wasn't a message. It was a bus transfer ticket, time-stamped from 2 days earlier. On the back, written in hurried pen strokes, were 4 words. Don't wait for later. My chest tightened. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't meant for anyone. But I knew, instantly, that it belonged to him. Something inside me shifted. He hadn't disappeared because he didn't want to be found. He had disappeared because he had already given me everything I needed. I stood there with that worn bus ticket in my hand, the words on the back burning through me more sharply than the cold ever could. Don't wait for later. It wasn't profound poetry. It wasn't dramatic. But it felt like it had been carved directly into the part of me I'd spent years avoiding. For the first time in a long time, I felt something clear, a direction, a push, a decision forming even before I understood it. I went home. Not because I wanted to run from what happened, but because I knew the next step wouldn't happen out on the street or on a frozen bench. It had to happen in the place where my silence had grown roots. Inside my house, everything felt different. The quiet that usually pressed down on me now felt accusing. The framed photos on the wall looked like they were waiting, my son at 8 holding a fishing rod, my son at 12 blowing out birthday candles, my son at 17 wearing a cap and gown. Memories I'd convinced myself were just nostalgia suddenly felt like evidence. Evidence that I'd been a present father once. Before pride built a wall between us. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at that photo of him in his graduation robe. He'd looked so proud, so ready to take on the world. And I'd been proud of him too. I just never told him enough. Or maybe I did once, but not when it mattered. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. Not from age. From fear. When you've avoided someone long enough, even dialing their number feels like walking across thin ice. I scrolled until I found his name. I didn't press call. Not yet. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the phone like a lifeline. His last words to me rang in my memory, "You think you're always right, Dad. But you're not. And I can't keep talking to someone who refuses to hear me." At the time, I'd called it disrespect. Now I call it the truth. I opened a blank text message. I must have rewritten that first sentence 30 times. Everything sounded wrong, too stiff, too apologetic, too empty. I didn't want to send him a polished apology. I wanted to send him the truth. Finally, I typed. I'm sorry for the years I let silence do the talking. I miss you. I want to fix this while we still can. I hovered over the send button, the weight of the moment heavy. Then I pressed it before I could think myself out of it. I waited. 1 minute. 5. 10. Nothing. But I didn't feel defeated. For the first time in years, I'd taken a step forward instead of sinking deeper into regret. I set the phone down and went to my garage. There was an old box on the shelf, dusty, dented, barely holding together. Inside it were things I hadn't touched in ages, unused fishing gear, tools, a photo album, and a worn leather wallet my father had given me. I hadn't opened that wallet in decades. Inside the wallet was a folded note, my father's handwriting. Don't let the people you love carry your silence. I stared at the note, realizing the same message had reached me from 2 different men, from 2 different lives, in the same morning. That was when I knew this wasn't coincidence. It was time to rebuild what I had broken. To reclaim something I'd let slip through the cracks of my pride. Tomorrow would be Thanksgiving Eve. And for the first time in years, I didn't dread it. I had something to fight for again. Thanksgiving Eve arrived with a gray sky and the kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath. I woke earlier than usual, not because of restlessness this time, but because something inside me felt unsettled. Not in a bad way, more like anticipation wrapped in fear. I checked my phone the moment I opened my eyes. Still no response from my son. That was fine. I told myself not to expect anything overnight. Years of silence don't melt in a handful of hours. But I kept the phone close anyway, as if holding it would pull him closer. I spent the morning cleaning the house, sweeping the floor, dusting old shelves, wiping down picture frames. Not because anyone was coming over. But because it felt good to prepare the space for hope, even if hope hadn't knocked yet. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened. Wind rattled the windows, carrying the sharp scent of winter. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch, the same spot where I used to sit with my son when he was little, watching fall leaves drift across the yard. I thought about the homeless man, about his story, his father's voicemail, the last words he never got to return. I wondered where he was now. Whether he had found a place warm enough to rest. Whether he'd ever know the impact of what he'd shared with me. As I sat there, the ache in my chest deepened, not the painful kind, but the kind that lets you know you're still capable of feeling something real. Something alive. Then my phone buzzed. One vibration. Short. Sharp. A message. My hands shook as I picked it up. The screen lit up with my son's name, the first time I'd seen it appear in years. His message was simple. Dad, can we talk tomorrow? My breath caught. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the moment sink into me. Not relief, something deeper. A quiet, fragile beginning. A crack of light in a wall built over years. I typed back. Yes. Anytime. When I set the phone down, the wind eased. The house felt warmer. The silence didn't feel like an enemy anymore. For the first time in a long time, Thanksgiving didn't feel like a reminder of what I'd lost. It felt like the start of getting something back. Thanksgiving morning came quietly. No parade on the TV. No smell of turkey from a busy kitchen. Just sunlight slipping through the blinds and the steady hum of a house that had gone too quiet for too many years. But it didn't feel empty anymore. Something had shifted, subtle, but undeniable. I sat at the table with my coffee, staring at the empty chair across from me. For years, that chair had been a reminder of failure, the physical shape of everything I hadn't done, every phone call I didn't make, every apology I swallowed instead of speaking. But now, the silence felt different. Not accusing. Not mocking. Just waiting. The homeless man's words kept replaying in my mind. Don't wait until it's too late. Silence grows teeth. You still have time. It was strange how a stranger, someone the world walks past without even bothering to look at, could become the mirror I needed. Not a gentle one. A true one. The kind that shows you who you've become and who you're still capable of being. Maybe that's why he crossed my path. Maybe it wasn't coincidence at all. Life has a way of placing the right people in front of you at the exact moment you're about to disappear into yourself. Some of them stay. Some vanish before you can thank them. But their impact lingers like footprints that don't fade. I looked at my phone again. My son's message from the night before sat there like a small flame in a dark room. We were going to talk today. For the first time in years. And whether that conversation ended in tears, forgiveness, or just awkward silence, it would be a beginning. A chance I refuse to lose. If there's anything you take from this story, let it be this. Time is not guaranteed, but chances are. And you only lose them when you choose not to take them. If stories like this one remind you of what really matters, of family, forgiveness, second chances, make sure you subscribe. There are more stories worth hearing, especially the ones we don't tell until life forces us to. My life changed because a stranger spoke the truth. Maybe yours can too.